So then I would say these distilled stories that I'm talking about, the stories that are written, say, by great authors. I'm particularly fond of Dostoevsky, whose works are, he's head and shoulders above anyone I've ever read in terms of writers of fiction. He deals with the hardest questions that human beings face, and he has characters on both sides of the argument, and they really lay out the arguments. It's not like Dostoevsky, you know, he's got a belief, and so he has a character, and that character has his beliefs, and that character always wins the arguments. That doesn't happen in a Dostoevsky novel at all. He sets up a character, and then he sets up like 3 or 4 antagonists, and those antagonists, they're not straw men, they're like iron giants. They just stomp his protagonist, you know, and the whole thing is a war between these different conceptions of being, and it's amazing to see, it's amazing to read. So you distill these stories. Great authors distill stories. Great storytellers distill stories. And we have stories that are very, 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 very old. Those are usually religious stories of one form or another, but they can be fairy tales. Because fairy tales, some people have traced fairy tales back, you know, more than 10,000 years. And so they're part of an oral tradition. And oral traditions can last for tens of thousands of years. And you know, it's a story that's been told for 10,000 years is a funny kind of story. It's like people have remembered it and obviously modified it. It's like the game of telephone, you know, where I tell you something and you whisper it to the person next to you and so on. It's like a game of telephone that's gone on for, you know, 1,000 generations, and all that's left is what people remember, and maybe they remember what's important, because you tend to remember what's important. And it isn't necessarily the case that you know what the hell it means. You don't know what music means, but you know, that doesn't stop you from listening to it. You don't know, generally speaking, what a movie that you see or a book that you read means, not if it's profound. It means more than you can understand, because otherwise why read it? Well, so the idea is this, is that we're necessarily nested inside moral systems. The moral systems are predicated on narratives, narrative dramas of sorts, and the moral systems are what orient us in life, and the reason to understand them, to the degree that you can, is because you need to know how to live. Nietzsche said that if you had a why, you could bear any how, and that's good. One of the things that the Auschwitz guards used to do to the prisoners, and this is very telling, so at Auschwitz there was a sign that said, "Work will make you free." It was a little joke, not really a very funny joke. You know, it's the kind of joke that you have to be satanic, is the appropriate term to conceptualize, and to dare to state. So when the Auschwitz prisoners came to Auschwitz, you know, they were already pretty rough shape. They were in cattle cars. They'd been separated from their families. Everything had been taken from them. They were transported for a long time. They were standing up. The kids were suffocating because there was no room in the, you know, it was so packed in there. They didn't have anything to eat. There weren't any toilet facilities of any sort. It was like you got rid of 20% of the people just transporting them. You know, the ones on the outside of the cars, they froze to death because of course it was cold, and pretty nasty. And then when they got to Auschwitz, the guards used to have this game that they would play, and this is part of the work will set you free thing. They would get a prisoner, they'd take a prisoner who's already in pretty rough shape, and then have them carry a sack of wet salt, 100 pounds, from one side of the camp to the other. And you know, when you think of a camp, you think of something like a football field, you know, maybe something that big, fences around. It's like, no way, man, these were cities. There were tens of thousands of people in these places. So from one side of the camp compound to the other, that was a good hike. And that wasn't bad enough. They had to get them to carry it back and put it in the same place. Now, that's poetic in its malevolence. You know, what you're doing is you're harnessing the human compulsion to engage in useful activity and demonstrating how absolutely futile that is despite its difficulty. Seems like a bad thing to do. People need, it's a parody of meaninglessness, that's what that is. And you know, people need meaning in their lives because their lives are difficult.